Should you rent or sell your home? So this is a decision a lot of people make, especially when we're in a seller's market. It might be a good time to sell. What if you want to get into investments and start an investment portfolio of rental properties? It could be good to already start with a house that you already have to get going on that venture. So how do you make the decision? Let's look at a couple of factors. Number one, cash flow. So you want to look at all your expenses that you would do as a rental. What do you need to pay for? Is there an HOA fee? Your taxes? You would get landlord insurance for homeowners insurance. It's a bit cheaper than the actual homeowners insurance, and factor that in. Are you using a property manager, and what is their fee? What are you going to use them a la carte? So you can use them for everything. You can use them just for finding tenants. What vacancy rate are you expected for your area? Are there any repairs and maintenance that you need to account for? If it's a newer home, there may be less repairs and maintenance issues coming up. But if you have a 30, 40-year-old home and the roof needs to be replaced soon, maybe the HVAC as well, you got to account for those costs in your pricing. And then figure out, well, how much would the property rent for? And then look at that compared to your expenses and see if you're going to make any money, which would be cash flow. That is your net after you figure out all your expenses, and then what is the income coming in for that particular property. Another reason you might want to rent your home is maybe you're moving somewhere for a year to 3 years, but you want to come back and live in this home again. So maybe it's a temporary thing for your job or just for travel. I went traveling around the world for a year. I met other people doing that as well, who then rented their home for the year and then had a place to come home to. So that's a valid reason to rent out your home, and then you can move back in. Now, what if it's a buyer's market versus a seller's market? So right now we're in a seller's market, so it could make sense to sell the home because you want to maximize your profit based on the market just really favoring the sellers, because there's a ton of buyers and not enough inventory out there. So you might get a higher price than you would in a buyer's market. So that might be a reason to justify selling now as opposed to renting out your house. Now, what about interest rates? Right now we've been, in the last year or two, record lows for our interest rates. So if you have your home totally paid off, your best bet is to get a loan before you end up doing the rental. Now, you should be getting a loan and staying in it for a year and a day before you end up converting it to a rental property. But with the historically low rates, a primary residence loan is below 3%, is phenomenal. And so that's the best way to leverage your money. Take the cash out, do a cash out refi, even if you own it outright. You can get that money out and then use that money leveraged to buy another home or put it into the stock market or other type of investments. Now, why would you want to sell? So one thing to look at for when you may want to sell it as opposed to rent it is to look at the capital gains. So the way it works with taxes is if you sell your primary residence, meaning you've lived in it for at least 2 years out of the last consecutive 5 years, so any 2 years in that time span, then for a single person, any gain you achieved up to $250,000 is tax-free. And for married couples, it would be $500,000. So if you are in a high appreciation market like Boulder, well, then you may have appreciated $100,000, $200,000 in the last 3-4 years. So as long as you've lived in it in 2 years, in the past 5, and you were to sell, then that $200,000 gain would be tax-free. Now, if you wait, so let's say you've lived in it for the past 2 years, and then you rent it out for the next 5 years, and then you go to sell, because it wasn't your primary residence for 2 years in the past 5, you would end up paying capital gains on the full amount of appreciation that you got. So that's a good money savings thing, because tax-free is really awesome. So you might as well save your money and get that money out, or you can rent it for up to 3 years and then sell. Make sure you just sell before that 2 years out of the past 5, so that the capital gains, you wouldn't have to pay any. Another reason you might want to sell, because you don't want to deal with tenants. Not everyone can handle working with tenants. Of course, you can hire property managers to do all the work for you, so that's great. But there are issues that can come up with tenants, and as we saw through the pandemic, the whole eviction and not paying rent, which is a bit of a crazy time. And it really depends on where your rentals are. My rentals were fine through COVID, but some people don't want to have to deal with waking up at 3 a.m. to fix a toilet. If there's only one toilet in the house and they don't have another option, or stuff's overflowing everywhere, that can be messy. Another thing to consider is maybe your house is not really a good rental. Maybe it's not going to find proper renters because you're too rural, or maybe it's just too expensive and no one's going to pay what you're looking for to be able to rent that out. Or the vacancy would be too high because of that price there. And there are some markets where it's actually cheaper to buy than to rent. So that might be a place where there's very few rentals because there isn't a rental market. People would rather just buy. Also look at, well, who's in your area? Do you have temporary people coming in? For example, Boulder, we have a huge startup community, and there are people coming just for temporary purposes, or professors on sabbatical, or students. Anytime you're near a university or hospital has interns that come and people in residence, that's where you have people who don't want to buy. They actually want to rent. But if you don't have that market, then it might make more sense to sell because you don't have renters in your area. Now, there are also additional expenses that come with doing rentals. For example, the city of Boulder, you have to get a rental license, which costs money, includes an inspection that you have to do every 3 to 4 years. You have to update it. And so there's so much additional cost there. Plus property management if you're not going to manage it yourself. And then vacancy, if you don't actually get it rented, then how long is it vacant? Because that's costing you money on your mortgage and other expenses. And if you just updated your home with like high-end everything, and maybe you don't want to have a renter in there who might mess it up before you do decide to sell. There's also looking at the return on investment, your ROI, because if your the money that you're putting in and dealing with and having to pay for property management and all that, the return that you get from rental income may not really make sense. It may not be a good investment. For example, if you could sell your home and make $100,000 profit right now, but if you rent, it would only make you $1,000 a year in cash flow, that 1% return on investment may not really be worth it. You're probably better off taking that $100,000 profit and investing that in something else. And it could be a different property, or it could be another investment opportunity that has a higher return. So those are some things to look at and analyze whether it's worth it to sell your house or go ahead and rent it. You can call property managers that are in your area and ask them, what would something like your house rent for, and what would be the average vacancy rate? So those are the good ones that you can call, and you can do it as like an interview, as if you were going to potentially hire them, because you would want someone who knows these things, know how much it should rent for, what the vacancy would look like, what are your demographics. You can find online whether or not your city is primarily rental or owner occupied. You can look this up. So for example, Boulder was 58% rentals. That's a lot. That's a lot of rentals. That's more than half of the people are renting as opposed to owning. So looking at that now, that's a really good rental market. That means there's a strong number of people looking to rent in Boulder, partially because it's so expensive and it's a highly desirable area. So you want to look at some things to analyze whether yours is a good option for selling versus renting it out. If you like this content and want to keep learning more, please subscribe to my channel.